Good morning, everyone. Doing my first live ever. I had some time this morning before I decided I was going to go mow my lawn and stuff. Playing some Hearthstone because it's like what I do in the mornings when I have my monster. Not much of a coffee drinker, but I did want to kind of talk about some of the other things because I'm getting a bunch of questions on my last couple of videos about Russia and what's going on with them. And I'm trying to pull some of the questions so I can talk about it going forward. So one of the things was green energy. How can green energy kind of counter Russia's problems with pushing oil, pushing energy to Europe, the sanctions that we're putting on them, and the fact that a lot of European nations and especially Ukraine need Russian oil. So the reality is a lot of the things that we need for green energy come from Russia too. So when we hear that a new prime minister is being elected in Australia, which is a huge swing for those pro-climate change people, that's great. The policies can be there, but the materials aren't. So things like, for especially like nuclear power, uranium in Europe comes from Russia. There are countries that have stuff like that. Australia has a lot of resources, but they're not even remotely close. If you combine Australia, Canada, the United States' ability to pool its resources for green energy, it's not gonna match Russia's. So those types of things are going to still require Russia. And I'm going to go on this live as long as I can because my phone's at like 53%. And like I said, I got to mow the lawn and stuff. But anyway, so kind of I'll try to hit up some of your questions. What made me want to do a TikTok live? I was just sitting here playing Hearthstone, which is like a game I kind of just do to relax while in the morning. I was reading the newspaper. I'm probably the last millennial on the face of the earth that reads a physical newspaper still. So, and I was like, you know what? I'll just go live while I'm screwing around on my computer, try to answer questions, and we'll see what goes. I've never done this before, so if like graphics pop up, I'm not sure what they mean. I'm not sure what anything means. I'm kind of an old school, just kind of talking kind of person, but I'll keep an eye on the questions as I'm doing this and whatnot. Will any allies provide security guarantees after they win? Absolutely, yeah. We'll definitely provide security guarantees. We'll provide security guarantees to Ukraine if they lose. Poland especially has already started providing security guarantees, but they will not join NATO. Ukraine will not join NATO, unfortunately, because it's just too volatile for NATO. Having a country that is in active war or in that close of a conflict with Russia is too volatile for NATO, and that will make it so Russia will, in the transition, will absolutely attack, and then NATO will have to make a very hard decision. The alliance would have to break down and say we aren't going to come to NATO's aid or Ukraine's aid, or the alliance comes to Ukraine's aid at that point and risks a nuclear war with Russia. So I think the EU is more of a possibility for sure. But it's got a lot of things got to happen before that takes place, and it's probably at least a decade out. A lot of the volatility between Russia and Ukraine need to quiet down. A lot of the internal situations with Ukraine, such as their economy, needs to come back, and we'll see there. EU is more of a chance. NATO, I would be very surprised. And I think even Zelensky is seeing the writing on the wall and saying that NATO is not necessarily an option for Ukraine at this point. So, hello from Norway. I want to go to Norway. I've never been there. I've been all over Europe, but I've never been to Norway. Are Ukrainians being trained in NATO boot camps? I wouldn't say NATO boot camps per se, but Ukrainians do get trained. So when I was in the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, which is actually this sign right here, it says GMRC, we trained Ukrainians. We trained them in how to fight on tanks, small unit tactics, logistics, everything. They worked with us in Germany, and we would actually go to Ukraine too. Teams, not mine because I was artillery logistics, but the various Marine Corps teams and stuff would go train them as well. So let's see here. Will there be a world order and peace restored after nuclear war? That's a good question. I'll caveat that. I think that the nuclear war prospect is not there. I think that nuclear war is way oversold right now by the Russians, and they don't want nuclear war. I don't think they want to fight Western nuclear powers, and that would be a situation where China would get involved. China would see the global order that they're helping shape right now start to break down, and they're very business and economic interested. Their economy is kind of struggling right now. In fact, I saw some statistics that said for the first time in 50 years, the Chinese economy is going to be slower than the US economy. And that's a big deal for China, as they are a growth-focused economy in order to maintain the momentum going forward. And it has a lot to do with their population problems and the fact that they've invested a ton of their economy into real estate. And they're having to kind of liquidate that now to keep propping it up. So if China sees that nuclear war is a possibility and it could interrupt their vision, I think they would step in and talk to Russia before any real fight takes place. So do NATO countries, let's see here, do NATO countries benefit from Sweden and Finland joining? Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the way the map is, and I don't have a map or anything, but the way the map of Russia is, there's up in northern Russia, running along the Finnish border is a nuclear weapons site. And that's where a lot of Russian bombers are. A lot of they put a lot of their nuclear subs up there in the northern Arctic area up there. And what's happening is there's two lines of logistics that run to that area, and they run parallel. It's a rail and a road and a rail that go up there from the main body of population in Russia. Those are within something like 50 kilometers of Finland. That's why Russia's kind of freaking out about Finland, because Finland could eliminate the connection from Moscow, St. Petersburg to their nuclear arsenal up in that northern area. So Finland joining based on that alone is a huge deal. It gives us such a massive strategic advantage. It also provides the Western nations basically access to the Baltic Sea unfettered. You might as well just call that Lake NATO at that point, because Russia loses basically all leverage there. So I'm fully on board with Finland and Sweden joining. So let me see here. How much ground does Russia want Ukraine, and when and where they stop? So I'm of the opinion that Russia wants all of Ukraine. They've used this idea of denazification. They've used this idea of just wanting to free the people of the Donbass and Crimea, but they want to bring the entirety of Ukraine, and not just Ukraine. They want Moldova, they want Poland, they want the Baltics. They want to create enough standoff distance from what they see as the objective threats in Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States from their major population centers to have some relief. From the Carpathian Mountains, and again, I should have a map or something, from the Carpathian Mountains going east into Russia, it's all flat territory. It's impossible to defend, especially against an advanced military. Once you have the Carpathian Mountains there, it forces militaries to funnel from the Baltic Sea into the Carpathian Mountains, and Russia can manage that better. The problem is those mountains are ran by Western nations, not Russia. So Russia needs that territory to secure itself, and that's likely what they would eventually want. Now, the big problem for Russia is to get there, they have to go through NATO countries, and NATO won't stand for that, I don't think. But they want all of Ukraine, for sure. So, what do I think about the AUKUS? I like the AUKUS. I think it's a good start to countering China's attempts to become a power in the South China Sea. But the reality is, for us to be serious about countering China, we have to bring India in on that. I love the Australians. I love the Brits being in there. Very strong naval power there with the Brits and the United States combined. But I think it's an alliance that on paper is a good start. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that we should have a CETO, which is like a NATO version of the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which was a thing that was considered for a while. I think that the United States has pivoted from Europe. I think Europe can handle Russia, and our focus in the US is going to become more China focused, in which case we will bolster more alliances. So I see it, AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US alliance expanding to potentially include countries like Japan, definitely the Philippines, potentially South Korea, and ideally we can counter Russia's population advantages with in India bringing in. But like I said, India is very complicated right now. So they have some anti-Western views, but they're not too keen on Russia either. In general, they're very much in their own world of what they're wanting to do. The biggest thing for them is hitching their wagon to the U.S. Means that they can counter China. So, and these questions are coming through quick, so I'm sorry if I'm missing them. Let's see, how long can Russia keep this up, weapons-wise? Originally, I'd said not very long. So there's a couple things that you have to look at when it comes to Russia's ability to continue to fight in Ukraine. First and foremost, Russia has a 3-to-1 advantage in population and with Ukraine. And I've seen that Ukraine has mustered something like 700,000 soldiers. That's huge. That's amazing. But the reality is Russia, if it wanted to mobilize, which it hasn't yet, if Russia wanted to mobilize, it would bring to bear probably 2 to 5 million troops. And as I said in a video before, these troops, the Russians would be willing to lose 500,000 people. They have an insane capacity to inflict pain on themselves and others and kind of just brush it off. So if there was a mobilization, I think that Russia could go a very long time. In their current state, I think that probably within the next 60 days, Ukraine has the capability to push Russia completely out of Ukraine. I just don't see Russia rolling over and letting that happen. I think they say that this becomes an existential crisis for them, not to use nuclear weapons, but to generally create a general mobilization, at least a regional one, to bolster troop levels. And if countries continue to fund Russia through energy schemes such as Germany and Italy, and others are doing it as well, they're going to have funding to build the things. Now, where their problem comes in is in high-tech stuff. All the countries that provide them high-tech materials to build advanced weaponry that continues to be destroyed have sanctioned them. This is countries like Japan, the United States. This is countries in Europe, specifically Germany and others. China, who provides them a lot of high-tech, has kind of backed away because they don't want to deal with U.S. sanctions in that regard. So they've backed off from providing that high tech. So Russia's, as you heard, was using like washing machine chips to bolster their tech needs in their weaponry. So that will be their choke point, is their advanced weaponry. But they have a lot of artillery and they have a lot of tanks. They have way more than Ukraine does, and they have more people. And as long as they keep getting money from their energy, they could do this for quite a long time, unfortunately. Let's see. I'm sorry. If there's like trolls in here, I don't see them. I'm sorry. When I start talking, I kind of blank out from the questions. So why did the U.S. use nukes against Japan? So the reality for the United States when it would have come to invading Japan is that the amount of casualties that it would have inflicted on both countries would have been catastrophic. The amount of casualties the U.S. would have inflicted against Japan would have been roughly the same as what they would have inflicted using nuclear weapons. I'm not advocating for nuclear weapons, but in that scenario, it came down to the lesser of two evils. It was completely wiping Japan off the face of the earth through conventional arms with a U.S. invasion that would have killed millions on both sides, or scare Japan into acquiescing with 2 very large nuclear weapons. And that's what we did. And Japan gave up at that point without having another American life lost. So that's kind of why. Let's see here. Where am I at here? Heard anything about troops that surrendered in Mariupol? They get released yet? No, the last I heard about the troops in Mariupol is they were potentially being negotiated for a transfer with Russian officials, high officials that had been captured. These were some of the proxies that Russia wanted to put in place. But I think there's going to be a large outcry, and unfortunately, these Mariupol fighters are going to end up stuck in prison camps or worse, especially because it becomes a a public relations problem for Russia to give up. Their whole fight was against the Nazis and this Nazification. And this is one of the units that they point out as the Nazified unit. So because of that, they're not going to be so keen on just using them as a very highly public prisoner exchange. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think those Mariupol fighters, the Azov fighters, are in a very bad situation when it comes to being in Russian hands. So let's see. What about Russian type? I don't worry about a U.S. civil war. So here's the thing about the U.S. The U.S. media loves to tout how terrible things are to the world and to ourselves. But in the grand scheme of things, so let's go back to what happened on January 6th. January 6th, I'm talking about the Capitol insurrection where they went in. Traditionally, when something like that takes place and there's a real problem, that's legit, nice. The real problem with some sort of overthrow or civil war, there would be some follow-on. But do you know what the follow-on after January 6th was? A lot of people telling them, we're going to do really well in the polls and we're going to crush you in the elections. That's very American. That's the way it's supposed to go. I think what happened after January 6th is everyone was a bit shocked and kind of took a step back, and very American things took place. We turned to beating our chest in our parties and our various polls and saying we're going to win the elections, and it focused on the elections. It never went further than, we never armed anybody more. We never went further than that, what happened on that day. And that's why I don't think that. And the U.S. is very stable. Unfortunately, for the rest of the world, the U.S. is probably more stable than much of the world. Even though our media makes it look like we're out of control, we're really not. Most people are living relatively decent lives. Our gas prices seem high here, but if you go to Europe, it's out of control. If you can look at things like our ability to continue to change the government as we see fit, those things haven't changed. There's just not a lot of things economically, health-wise. People are secure in their personal security. All the things that generally point to what caused a civil war just aren't present currently in the U.S., other than a lot of hot air rhetoric saying there's going to be a civil war. I don't think there is. I think the U.S. is going to continue to be kind of a bastion of stability as the world destabilizes a bit due to energy situations. So let's see here. What else? NATO. Let's see. What about a nuclear armed Ukraine? Yeah, absolutely not. That's not going to happen. Even if Ukraine, who has the technology to build nuclear weapons on their own, begins to do that, they would probably incur a lot of not necessarily military wrath, but just diplomatic wrath from the West. And if it starts to happen, the Russians will attack their nuclear capability. The Russians will absolutely not allow Ukraine to have nuclear weapons at all, period. It'd be a situation similar to Israel, Iran. The minute Iran gets close to making a nuclear weapon, viruses come in like Stuxnet and mysteriously centrifuges blow up and things like that. So I don't think Ukraine will ever have nuclear weapons. So did Ukraine used to have nukes? They did. They used to have nukes. That was part of the deal where the agreement where Ukraine would give up their nuclear weapons to Russia for them to decommission them. And as a part of that, various countries, including the United Kingdom, the U.S., Russia, as well as some others, told them that they would get security assurances. And this is where a lot of the confusion comes. So people will say, why is the U.S. and UK not coming in and defending Ukraine with troops? Because they said they would provide for the security of Ukraine. Well, the U.S. was very explicit that they wanted to give security assurances to Ukraine, but not complete support. Because if the U.S. had come in and said, we will support Ukraine in defending their territory with our troops, Russia would have backed out of the deal. And so every country provided security assurances. Now, unfortunately, it seems like Russia was like, yeah, we'll provide assurances, knowing full well that no Western country wants to invade Ukraine, but then realizing that these assurances for Russia were just providing material, money, etc. It wasn't anything tangible in troop levels and whatnot. So let's see here. Do you think we'll see two-digit fuel prices in the USA? No, I don't, because here's the thing. The US just recently, and this is just in the last few years, decade or so, started exporting oil. Congress gave authorization to the president to start exporting oil, but in that authorization, they gave the president the ability to shut off exports in times of crisis. There was never a definition of what a crisis is in the US when it comes to oil or gas prices and oil. So what happens is, as oil goes higher, the president can shut off those exports and internalize the U.S. shale oil system. And it's very robust. Between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, we're kind of sealed off. We can support ourselves with oil. Countries like China can't do that. And if that oil gets too expensive, President Biden or whoever's president, for their political livelihood, will shut off exports so that it'll drive U.S. prices downward. And what will inevitably happen is there will be a U.S. market that is detached from the rest of the global market of oil, and that will cause U.S. prices to be probably half to 1/3 of that of the rest of the global world, or the rest of the world. So you would see probably $4 oil, as we're seeing now, maybe $5 oil or gas, while the rest of the country is seeing maybe double that, or rest of the world, that is seeing double that. So I don't see U.S. Oil and gas becoming that expensive, no. So what's the future of armor battle? The future of armor battle, so talking about tanks, I'm assuming, but armor battle is going to require a very robust infantry backup for them. So they will support each other. Armor protects infantry from armor. Infantry protects armor from infantry. And why I say that is those infantry, they're going to have to deploy scouts. They're going to have to deploy defensive measures to fight against javelins. I don't think that armor is going away. I don't think tanks are going away, because the minute a country gets rid of its tanks, it has a major gap in its capability. I just think that they're going to have to integrate in a combined arms fashion where there's air assets, whether it be drones or fighter aircraft, patrolling, or helicopters. There's going to be infantry to counter the javelin infantry threat or other anti-tank missile threat. And they're going to all move together. And actually, that's how the U.S. trains. I'm surprised that the Russians don't train like that. They're actually quite bad at this. And we've actually trained the Ukrainians in this manner too, this combined arms. And it's been very effective. That's why it seems like Russia's getting completely smoked right now. So let's see. Did I ever murder someone? No, I've never murdered anyone. Let's see. Can you explain the advantages of Ukraine getting updated artillery? A lot of it has to do with precision. And we saw this with the pontoon bridge. So the pontoon bridge situation where over the course of a few days, 3 different separate attempts, Russia tried to cross, I think it was the Donetsk River. I can't remember. But the Ukrainians hit them with very precise, effective artillery. And when that happened, they lost it into like 1.5 battalion tactical groups along with hundreds of soldiers. It was actually quite devastating. And bringing in accurate fires and artillery that the U.S. uses, especially with those what they're called Excalibur rounds. They're those glide path rounds that can outrange Russian artillery. That's huge. Being able to outrange is a big deal, and it forces the Russian artillery to fire and move. And if they don't move, they are subject to counterfire from Ukraine, and that's a major tactic that they learned from Western artilleries. And if that's the case, the Russians won't last very long if they cannot move. And for the longest time, they liked to just be dug in. But since then, they have to move. And because of that, Russian artillery has kind of degraded a bit. But again, Russia has a lot of it. So it's kind of moot, because it's almost like you destroy one and it pops up 2 more, because Russia just has a lot of material in that regard. But Western artillery, along with the training that goes with it, is going to be very effective for Ukraine. And like I said in one of my videos, I do think Ukraine is going to win this fight. I just don't know what the entire war looks like. So, yeah, we'll see what goes on there. What about, let me see here. I'm looking at my screen here because it's easier to see. So I think there's like a lag time between the two here. Could we retake the Black Sea from Russia? We could. Absolutely. Turkey by itself could. The U.S. could. We won't. That immediately opens up a direct contact with Russia over basically a fight in the Black Sea, a naval fight, and we don't want that. We don't want to fight Russia. We've made that explicitly clear. So unfortunately, what's leading to is Russia's blockade of Ukraine is causing a major food crisis, and millions of people in places like Africa, Southeast Asia, Middle East are going to struggle. There's going to be a lot of things that were comfortable for a lot of people, including food, for the longest time. And right now it looks like the Ukrainians are going to be able to at least harvest maybe 2/3 of their wheat product and get it out. But that's assuming Russia lets it go. And people say, well, why doesn't the UN do something? Well, the UN unfortunately does not have a military. The UN relies a lot on NATO forces, and Russia wouldn't see the US or the UK or Japan or something like, not Japan, but Western navies coming in and saying, oh, we're flying under the flag of the UN. They would say, bullshit, you're NATO, we see, and it would start a fight. So that's a big problem with that as well. So let's see. I kind of gave up on Hearthstone. It's hard for me to answer questions and play Hearthstone while doing it. So it is. Why Boise? I was born here. I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho. When I was 18, I left, went to California for college. I was a college baseball player, actually, and I got scholarship to play baseball. And then I played for New Mexico and then ruined my shoulder. But it's always just been home, and it's a great place to raise a family. It's a great place to live. A lot of outdoor stuff, so that's why I like Boise. So, excuse me. Let's see here. Russian youth potentially rising up. Here's the problem with that. Yeah, the Russian youth is a force, but I'm concerned that the majority of the Russian youth that would be rising up are actually just leaving. So something like a little over 500,000 of the best, brightest, and youngest people in Russia are leaving the country. They're afraid of the authoritarian government of Putin. And so that does two things. Yes, it bolsters the countries that they're going to with the best and brightest and youngest of Russia. So that's good that countries that they're fleeing to get those types of people, but it's bad because those are the types of people that traditionally would have rose up to start these fights, but rather than risk their own livelihoods, they just said, I'm out, and left. So 500,000 people is a lot of people to lose when it comes to trying to bolster a revolution within a country. So I saw that video of the concert in St. Petersburg. It was amazing, where they were saying F the war and stuff like that. The Russian youth were doing that, but I just don't think that there's enough of them to rise up and take the amount of pain the Kremlin would be willing to inflict on its own population to maintain control. So, yeah. Am I LDS? No, I'm not. I'm not LDS. I'm just a general, what you'd call Christian. So, how much do you think the food shortages will affect the U.S. and the States? So, for the United States, food shortages globally, the only thing we will see is prices go up in the U.S. And it's not going to be dramatic. I mean, we're not talking like even a tripling or a doubling. It may get close to a doubling of wheat prices. The fertilizer and potash problem that comes out of Russia, because they provide a lot of the world's potash and fertilizer, can be countered over time with a joint Canadian-U.S. effort. Both of those countries are very capable of producing fertilizer and potash. We just don't right now because it was cheap coming out of Russia. Well, the U.S. and Canada have the capability of completely divorcing themselves with Russia, unlike Europe, unfortunately. So it's just going to take time. And in the meantime, the U.S., the North America area, the Canada, U.S., Mexico, is going to see prices rise, but we won't see famine like they would see in Africa or Southeast Asia. I do know that the U.S. is trying to ramp up, but like anything, you can't just ramp up and the next day you have food on tables. It's going to take at least a year to come out and do something where the U.S. can affect. And I'm worried that it's going to be a situation where famine's going to kill hundreds of millions of people. And Peter Zion said that over the next 3 years, if things don't change, we could potentially see 1 billion people die of famine in places like Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East. And that's a huge problem that, unfortunately, the U.S., Canada, Germany, etc., can't solve by themselves. So let's see what else here. Will Russia conduct a mobilization? I'm not sure. I don't know what Russia's willingness to be ejected from Ukraine looks like. Ukraine is probably, at the current state, like I said, Ukraine will eject Russia. They will push Russia out of their country. They're mobilizing 700,000 troops. They have basically an endless supply of equipment flowing in. They have the money. So Ukraine will be able to push Russia out. I just don't know how far Russia is going to allow that to happen before they say the areas around Russia, the states that surround or oblasts that surround Ukraine are in jeopardy of being invaded by Ukrainians. And we all know that that's horseshit, but the Russians will use that if they start really losing. And it could potentially lead to a regional mobilization around Ukraine, if not a general mobilization. So I don't know. They might eventually. But a lot of that depends on Russia or Putin and the Kremlin's political capital and what they can keep and maintain within their population and what they can continue to feed the Russian people with their support for such a thing. Now, last I saw, and you have to look at Russian polls with a little bit of skepticism, but even if it's off by 20%, I saw a poll that said 90% of Russians support the war. Even if we kind of pull back the reality of that and say it's 70%, that's still a significant majority support the war against Ukraine. I mean, in the United States, I don't think we support 70% of us support anything, quite frankly. So, yeah. Let's see. What do you think? Do you think Russians are on North Korea's level when it comes to being brainwashed? No, I don't think so, because interestingly, they still allow YouTube to go into that country, and it seems like VPNs are big. There's something like 25 million VPNs downloaded in the first few weeks of the invasion of Ukraine. So that's what concerns me, is I really believe Russians are getting the information. They just don't believe it. They don't believe what the West is saying. So I'm thinking that they're seeing this news coming off of YouTube or even from TikTokers like me saying this is what's happening, and they're so indoctrinated that they will see it and reject it. Whereas North Korea doesn't even see it. They don't see what goes on. They're truly a hermit kingdom, as they're called. Whereas Russia is almost more of a dangerous scenario because the Russian people have access somewhat to what's being said in things like the BBC or U.S. media or French media or German media, and they're rejecting it. They are saying, we still support what's going on. We believe our own Russian media over anything coming from the West. And now I think that's very dangerous. Like I said, they are supporting this from the Kremlin. And it may not be all of them, and it may not be all of them overtly supporting it, but at the very least, they're very skeptical of what's being said by the West. So let's see. Why do the Russians believe Putin? Believe it or not, Putin has actually made Russia better. Russia was not as wealthy. Russia was not as secure. Russia was not as in a place globally to be looked at as a peer, even to places like Germany. And Putin kind of brought that back. He brought higher wages to the Russians. He brought greater stability. He brought greater ties globally in trade to countries like China. And a lot of these people still remember or are taught very heavily what happened after the Cold War when the USSR collapsed. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 91, you have to think that was not long ago. I mean, that was only 31 years ago, 32 years ago. There's people definitely alive still today. There's children that remember in the 90s having problems finding food, and Putin kind of brought them out of that, made St. Petersburg a more cosmopolitan European city. That was like his hometown. Brought the Kremlin on par with other countries when it comes to influence. And so they saw that. The Russians see that, and they legitimately trust Putin going forward. Now, this is an uncharacteristic blunder for Putin, but we'll see how it goes. So that's why I think they're kind of going along for the ride still. So let's see. TikTok's been shadow banning me. Actually, funny story. I've seen a lot of my posts are getting less views than they used to. I used to be able to pull in like, I don't know, 15,000 views at a minimum. And my most recent ones, I'm only getting like when I did the 40 billion bill talking about what we're giving Ukraine, that one's only got 4,500 views. My AM update from yesterday only has 5,000 views. So it's weird. I am getting kind of like lesser, and I just figured you guys were getting sick of seeing my bummer attitude on TikTok. So what are my views on Brexit? So interestingly, I'm not really educated very well on Brexit. One thing from a U.S. perspective, it's very good for the U.S. because it means that we don't have to deal with the conglomerate power of the EU to deal with Britain. But I'm not too sure from a British perspective whether it's good or not. So, but I'm not sure. I don't want to like guess. I do know that the deals that are being made with Britain between the British and the U.S. are going to favor the U.S. more than they would have in the past. But the British will have to decide if that's what they really wanted. I will say when it comes to things like what's going on right now, it gives you the UK freedom to maneuver with regard to Russian sanctions more so than the European Union countries do. So I'll have to look that up a little more. I probably should get spun up a little bit more on what Brexit's impact will be both on Britain, Europe, the world writ large. So what I think happens if Putin suddenly dies, I think he's got such a tight control on both his inner, like his tight inner circle, as well as his kind of intermediate circle, that there would probably be a pretty smooth transition. Someone said that it would go to the head of the FSB. Someone else said that it would go to one of the major business oligarchs, like the head of Gazprom. All of them share Putin's views. Some of them, including Lavrov and Medvedev, are very much exactly like Putin. Some of them, such as the FSB chief, are worse than Putin. So I don't think a lot will change if Putin dies. And especially if Putin dies from circumstances that are externally forced, like he's assassinated. If it can be tied to a Western nation, that would be something that would galvanize the Russian people. So I think that nothing really changes. If there was going to be a regime change, they would have to eliminate. There would have to be an elimination or an arrest or some sort of overthrow of something like 30 people for it to work. There's roughly 5 oligarchs that you can kind of lean on to kind of go either way, but currently have hitched their wagon to Putin. Those 5 can start the overthrow, but Putin is very much positioned in a way that his own people see that group of people, the oligarchy and Putin, as one entity. So if they try to start overthrowing them, the Russian people would look at it as traitorous. So Putin, unfortunately, has completely set himself up to be stuck and locked in this position for a long time. Do I think someone worse would take over? Yeah, supposedly the FSB chief, and I'm spacing on his name, the current head of the FSB is far worse. He's the type that I would be concerned that Putin is more level-headed, and that's funny to say, but I think Putin is more level-headed when it comes to using nuclear weapons, whereas I think the FSB chief would be more reckless with that. So let's see here. How is Putin going to explain these military kids lost at war? He's not going to. He won't. This is like the 3rd or 4th war where Putin has watched a bunch of people die and then basically told the parents to shut up. that he just hides them. And I told the story a while back on TikTok of the mom who had a son who fought in Chechnya, and the son was captured, and the Kremlin just didn't even acknowledge the son actually even existed. And so the mom had to go to a Chechen prison and pay off to get her son back. And they just aren't acknowledging the casualties. They just don't exist to the general public. And that's why Putin doesn't really have to explain anything when it comes to these casualties. Now, we're in a different world now than it was back in like 2000, or excuse me, not 2000, back in the early 1900s or even the 1800s during the Crimean War, where they lost like 450,000 people, or the Winter War when they lost 200,000. What we see happening is more in our faces. So there may be a difference there. There may be more of an outcry because of what they can get a hold of when it comes to information today relative to the past. But Putin will squash that quickly. So let's see here. Will Ukrainian get Crimea back? Love your content. Thank you so much, Tommy. They can. Yeah, absolutely. Ukraine can get it back. I don't know how long they can hold it, because Turkey cannot lock down the Black Sea from Russia forever. So right now the Black Sea Fleet is the only Russian fleet operating there. And I do believe that Ukraine has the military capacity to move into Crimea. The problem is for 8 years, that's kind of been the bastion of defense for Russia and Ukraine. So it would be a very bloody, deadly fight. And that's why I do think that Zelensky is being more realistic. He wants to eject Russia completely from Ukraine, but he understands that he can't do it in his current capacity. So he's using this as kind of ammunition to go to Western nations to say, I want them out of Crimea so they can never do this again, to cause food insecurity and their access to the Black Sea through Crimea. But if there's one place that Ukraine could definitively lose against Russia, it's in Crimea, unfortunately. We've seen them push, the Ukrainians have done an outstanding job pushing the Russians out of Ukraine and the north of Ukraine. But when you're being supported by a navy and Ukraine doesn't have a navy, it's very difficult. Now, the calculus on that is changing, because the U.S. military is supposedly providing naval strike missiles to Ukraine, and that might shift the strategic winds, so to speak, in favor of Ukraine. So we'll have to see. Crimea would be the last thing they would go for. They've got to worry. The Ukrainians got to worry about ejecting Russia out of the Donbass first. So let's see. Let's see where else we got. Another NATO EU. I don't think, yeah, like I said, I don't think the EU, NATO, or excuse me, Ukraine would join NATO. EU is a possibility. Who do I vote for? I vote many places. I don't do politics on this really, but I voted both Democrat and Republican. Just depends. I'm more of a candidate guy. I would say that I lean more right, but I'm very much a moderate, and I have voted in Democratic circles as well. So do I have on the Somalian problem? I haven't. Actually, after I did that video on Somalia, I kind of let it go. That's a good call, though. I should probably look into that, what's going on in Somalia with the deployment of our special forces operators. But after I did the video, I kind of forgot to follow up on it. So should we be worried about North Korea? We should be worried about North Korea in as much as their leader is crazy. I don't think the way North Korea operates, they have the capability of hitting the U.S. Now, they have missiles that can reach the U.S., but they don't have the technology to do what's called MIRVing, which is multiple independent, how am I spacing on it? Something vehicles. I can't remember what the R is. Re-entry, multiple independent re-entry vehicles, which means putting multiple warheads on one rocket. They don't have that technology yet. So they would fire one missile with one warhead. The U.S. has the technology to take that out. So the U.S. itself is probably defended. I would be more concerned about what North Korea would do to South Korea. they have enough firepower near the border in the demilitarized zone to hit Seoul and pretty devastate Seoul pretty heavily, as well as the forces, to include U.S. forces. Now, will they do that? I doubt it. And they have bigger problems right now. COVID is like running rampant through their country pretty heavily. And that's pretty scary for them, considering their vaccination rate is like less than 18% or something like that. So they have bigger problems going forward. And I'm not entirely sure they're worried about attacking South Korea or even the U.S. And their playbook is, they have this playbook, and we've seen it time and time again, and it's like the ebbs and flows of North Korea. And what happens is North Korea rattles its sabers, builds up its nuclear arsenal, and says, we're going to crush you and whatever. And then what happens is the U.S. and the West go, shut up, North Korea, and put a bunch of sanctions on them, and their people start getting hungry, and they start having problems. And then Kim Jong-un comes out and says, oh, no, we'll shut it down. We'll shut it down. Take the sanctions off. Please give us aid. And so the Western nations go, okay, good job. Here's some aid. We'll take your sanctions away. Here's some concessions and things like that. Thanks for not building nuclear weapons. And then suddenly, here we go again. Things get good in North Korea, and they go back up and start building nuclear weapons and saber rattle and stuff, and then more sanctions. And so what happens is North Korea gets this kind of ever-growing concession. So it's like it's on the upward swing, build nukes, reach the peak, sanctions are hitting too hard, drop down. But they never drop back to where they were. Rebuild again, sanctions, drop down. So it's a playbook that over the course of 6-7 years, we see this over and over again, and eventually North Korea gets what it wants over time. And it's something they've just done constantly. So it's kind of frustrating because they use their nuclear weapons to get concessions out of the West, and we have no kind of recourse because we don't want to attack them. But yeah, so do you think there's a chance China will become more moderate and less authoritarian? I mean, not with Xi in power, no. Xi Jinping is very much in the Putin authoritarian realm. He's not as, I don't think, so I will say this kind of carefully, he's not as dumb as Putin, Xi Jinping is, but he is very much has authoritarian aspirations, and he wants to build China just like Russia does. So I don't think that they will become less authoritarian. They will become less authoritarian in as much on paper to show the Western world to bolster their community, their global stance. But I don't think they truly will become like a republic like they claim they are, the People's Republic. It seems like every single authoritarian regime is some sort of republic, and they're just not. It's just a word they like to use. But so, man, yeah, 1,000 questions. Yeah, sorry, it's hard for me to run through all of these questions as I talk. So, someone asked about Poland annexing Ukraine. No, Poland won't annex Ukraine. People kicking around these random theories like the U.S. invades Ukraine and kicks Russia out, but we're not fighting Russia. We're technically fighting Ukraine. I mean, everyone could see through that. Poland annexing Ukraine. There was thoughts of that before, mainly because they wanted to try and bring Ukraine up under Poland's fold. That was never going to work. Poland and Ukraine, it would cause such strife internally to try to explain then what it's worth. And Poland and Ukraine are good friends. I mean, very good friends and allies. And so I just don't think everyone would see through that as kind of nonsense. So I just don't do that. I don't think that there was ever a chance that Poland or even the U.S. or any Western nation would invade Ukraine as justification, because then Russia could come in and said, we're liberating Ukraine from Western invaders, and that's something we don't want. So what do you think about the war in Iraq? I mean, I fought in the war in Iraq. I was not a fan of it. I will say that in the initial stages, the United Kingdom's intelligence on weapons of mass destruction was as credible as they thought it would be. I don't think anyone was trying to maliciously fake anything in that situation. I think they really did think that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, specifically chemical weapons, because he had used them before. And so the pretense for the invasion was there, and I think that the Western countries that invaded, their hearts were in the right places, so to speak. But what I didn't like is once all the writing was on the wall of what really happened, once Saddam was ousted, how we tried to rebuild that country was completely ridiculous and stupid. And that's a whole, like, I don't know, like a dissertation of itself. But I just don't think that Iraq was done well. Same with Afghanistan. In the end, we won the war. We absolutely dominated their militaries. We conducted regime change. All of the objectives that are what you would consider a military victory we had. Where we failed as Americans and as the West writ large, because there are other countries helping us, is in nation building. We thought we could build Iraq and Afghanistan in our image, similar to what we did with Germany and Japan after World War II, and we failed miserably. So we didn't necessarily fail. We definitely didn't fail in the military aspect. We just failed to try and instill a system that reflected more of the West, when culturally they just didn't want it. So let's see here. Let me see. What time is it? I got about, 5 more minutes, and then I've got to go help my wife with my kids and stuff. And then, I have to figure out this live thing with the moderators. I'm not, like I said, this is my very first live, and it's a lot of fun. I actually enjoy this. So I'll probably do a lot more of these going forward. It's just finding time and a quiet space in my chaotic household that has like 7 people living in it and a crazy dog. So, I'm going to try and do more of these, but I got to figure out like a path for this, how this works. I saw that you can have moderators, maybe having my wife moderate, etc. But going forward, I'm going to do more of these. I just don't know. I got to get better at them because I'm brand new. I'm just a crotchety old soldier. That's an elder millennial. So, duet Peter Zion. Oh, that would be amazing. I love Peter Zion. The dude is wicked smart. Actually, probably 30% to 40% of a lot of the things I talk about come from his discussions. I like a lot of his stuff. A lot of my stuff, I like to read books, but most of my stuff comes from like Rand Corporation or foreign affairs or foreign policy or defense news or other areas. So I do like that. I do have the mic. It's not plugged in. Here's the mic right here. It's a great mic, but it's not plugged in because when I plug it into my phone, my battery dies in like 20 minutes. So if I want to do these lives for longer than 20 minutes, I can't have the mic plugged in. So if it sounds like crap, I'm sorry. So where are my viewers from? So when I look at the analytics, 72% are Americans. Obviously, I'm an American. Oh, cool. Thanks. Whatever stars mean. I don't know what that means, but thanks. Most of my followers are obviously Americans. My second level of followers is Canadian. I want to say something like 7 or 8% is Canadian. And my third is United Kingdom at 6 or 5. It's real close. And then it's kind of a mix from there. It's got like 3% Australians, 2% Germans. I do have some like in the others category. It's like Polish, Ukrainian, etc. But the biggest ones are obviously Americans, Canadians, UK, and Australia. Those are probably my biggest ones. I have been seeing a lot more people from the Baltics, people from Scandinavian countries, so like people from Norway. And you guys like to comment, and I really enjoy it. So I really want to get up there. I've never been to Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. I want to get up there. So you guys look like you have some cool stuff up there. So Austria, I've been to Austria. It's amazing there. I've loved Austria. Innsbruck, Salzburg. Vienna is like my second favorite European city. So never been to Greece, and I regret that heavily. I'm actually going to take my wife to Greece in a couple of years, so don't tell her. I hope she's not watching this. But yeah, so I'm gonna probably jump off because it's 9:30. I really appreciate. I'm gonna do this again. I really enjoyed this. I'm gonna do this more. Thanks for everyone that watched. I think we got like 27,000 likes. That's crazy considering I only talked for, I don't even know how long, like maybe an hour. So, but thanks. I'll see about modding in the future. I'll see about trying to make it, churching up my presentation stuff, but really enjoyed this. And I'll try and put out some more videos later today after I do some of my chores and stuff. So have a good day, everyone. Thank you.